Analogue Day happen, which is Analogue, one of my favorite companies. The 16th of October it's officially Analogue Day in Big Week in Gaming calendar. You've had in last year, Analogue Pocket announced on that day, Mega SG the year before, and then the Super NT the year prior. So, Mega Drive and Super Nintendo. And this year, everyone was kind of having rumors, are they going to announce something? They did make an announcement. And I always love with these announcements, people project what they want into it. So the announcement was really simple. It just said announcement, and then it had a power sign like squared. And then it had the date, which is now in my world referred to as Analogue Day, 16th of October. And from that, people started going, oh, it's a GameCube because it's a cube, right? And then people are like, no, you idiot, that's a square, right? A cube would be a 3, and people just like going, oh, they're going to do an Analog Pocket restock. And I look at it, and I think someone found what it was, which was it's a all-in-one system that it clones almost every single NEC console. So that brings us all the way back to episode 1, where we actually reviewed Bonk's Adventure. So this is the TurboGrafx 16, PC Engine, SuperGrafx, TurboGrafx CD, and then the CD-ROM2, and in the Duo as well, we should call out as well. And it's being called the Analogue Duo. So it's kind of an interesting one because as far as I understand, none of these consoles came out in Australia. Is that your understanding as well?
Yeah, I believe so. I just want to say, let's officially, for this week at least, rename the podcast to Big Week in Analog.
Big Week in Analog. I have spoken a lot about analog. I feel like maybe a third of the episodes have got analog content in it. But look, and you know what? One thing about this announcement is... I'll get through the features first. So this is the first analog system that actually has a CD drive, and I do want to touch on that later and my thoughts around that. It is compatible with Hucards, TurboChips, CD-ROM, so all your original collection of TurboGrafx 16, PC Engine, and associated NEC console games, you can just plug straight in. Just like Analog normally does, you can use wireless controllers on it, your original controllers, and it outputs in HDMI, so 1080p. You'll need to get like an analog DAC if you want to then pump that through into a CRT. But this is actually amazing because PC Engine, I'm not sure how close you are to it, but it's probably one of the trickiest consoles to get outputting to like a HD source or to even a CRT. Like they have really bad capacitors, so people have to recap them. The modification costs a fortune. It's really hard because it's not a really big scene. And just for comparison, so this will retail at $199 and it's going to be released next year. Now with shipping, that's about $90 Australian. Like you're looking at like about $400 for this, like shipped to your house. Whereas just looking at the secondhand market for something that's not even the equivalent, it doesn't even have everything that this does. It's about $650 Australian, just because it's actually really hard to do. And also the quality, just given that you're talking about systems that are 30 years old now versus something that's brand new, like I think it's an amazing deal. Now, the community in general was so, like, people were really getting aggressively upset about this because they had the line limited quantities. And everyone's just like, oh my God, this is just Analog Pocket all over again. What's wrong with this company? I don't know, man. Like, I can't actually see this selling out like crazy. Like, for instance, the Mega SG, they still have copies for sale. And I think the difference between this versus other things, it's kind of like it's a bit of a captive audience. Like, I don't see younger kids in general getting into TurboGrafx 16. It's really the people who played it back then, have collections, or are into it now. I don't see you growing that audience very much. So they actually do need to be a bit careful about how much they produce. And I don't see this selling out on day one. Maybe it will. But I actually think if you want to get this in, I don't think you need to be as desperate to order this. But looking at history, it's probably a good idea when they announce the pre-order date, you get in and get on it quick, just given what happened with the Pocket. So yeah, like what did you think about this, Sweeney?
Yeah,
apart from that, I was going to go on and on about it.
No, it's a tricky thing to give my input because, as you said, these consoles never came out here. And even if they did, I probably wouldn't have owned one because, especially back then, like owning multiple consoles wasn't really a thing for most people. You just had one console and maybe a computer, and the thing for me is that means that I'm not interested in this in any way because I don't own any of the games. Now I know that there's ways, that I'm sure to like load ROMs and stuff eventually, but I'd be more interested in the TurboGrafx Mini that they announced a little while back, Konami or whoever, simply because that's got the games on there. But I just got to give another shout out to whoever it is that designs the look of these analog products.
Yeah,
they're so on point. They just all look so cool. And that picture that they've got with the CD going in as well as the Bomberman card, man,
the Hucard.
I know I can really see why people like almost collect these. Even if they don't plan to use them that often, they're like, I want this machine because it just looks so cool. And those cards, I never realized how cool they look. I love look at those cards.
Yeah, and so I'm not a collector at all. 95%, probably even higher than that, to be honest. I'm not going to get this. Same as you. And I think it's also because of Australia. Like, we didn't have TurboGrafx 16 come into our country. So, for instance, I was never a big Mega Drive / Genesis player. But we were familiar with it. It was really big in Australia. Some would say it was bigger than Super Nintendo. And I
don't start that again.
Well, I don't know. And I reached out to a bunch of people to try to find out, and no one could give me any data. We'll get it eventually. But just looking at this, I think because I'm not even familiar with it, when we played Bonk's Adventure, it's like I had no nostalgia for it at all, like zero. And it does impact you. Like, I feel like at least if I was more familiar when I was younger, I'd be like, oh yeah, I always wanted that thing. It looks really crazy. And I'm a bit like that with the Mega SG. Like, that's still available. And I tell you, if analog shipping wasn't as crazy as it is, like, it is so expensive to ship to Australia from analog. It's like $130, $140. It's insane. If it was more a reasonable price, like $40, $50, I probably would get a Mega SG, which is the Mega Drive / Genesis clone, which you can get adapters and play Master System as well. Now, I've played that. I, famously or infamously got a Game Gear, so I am actually familiar with some of these Sega titles, but yeah, this one I just don't have any affiliation with. But, to your point, the internal engineering, like the hardware stuff, which a guy called Kevtris does, and
Kevtris is it? Okay.
Yeah, well, no. So he does the FPGA stuff. So that's the internal.
Yeah.
And then the industrial design, they get different designers to do it. But, the guy Christopher Tabor, who's like the head of Analog, he does like, he gets so much hate. I don't understand it. I really don't. It's like, you don't have to buy these things. You know what I mean? Like, but to me, what he's doing is he's actually elevating retro gaming. He's like, to me, this looks better in my world, and maybe I'm crazy. This looks better than like the shit that Apple's putting out these days from an industrial design point of view. Like, if you actually look at what they're putting out there, like the Pocket, to me, it looks unreal. It looks so good. And you're right. Like, they just do such a good job on all fronts. Apart from their customer service, which is infamously bad. But yeah, like, it looks exciting. But and I just want to reiterate. So yeah, it is out next year, $200 US. It will be around, I think, 410 Australian dollars if you want to order this to Australia. My thoughts on this one. So, they've had a lot of issues with this whole Analog Pocket. So Kevtris, the guy who does the FPGA emulation, he's kind of already had this TurboGrafx 16 stuff in the works for a long time. So I actually think it was relative for them, a lot less effort to do this. I think that this is actually a really interesting strategy, what they're doing, because my thought, at least, is this is the first time they've really gone mass market on CDs. And CDs, you know how it is, man. It's like, that's a mechanical part. It's not like what Analog have done previously, which is all like solid state stuff. This is actually moving parts, things like that. I think that they're doing this and doing it on a console that is underappreciated, that's not likely to sell a lot of units. I think they're doing this now because then it gives them time to really like put something out there, make sure it works well, and then they could actually do a PS1 clone maybe next year, maybe the year after, and have worked out all the bugs around the CD drives and how do you manufacture that. Because I think if they did a PS1, they would sell like bloody hotcakes. Like that would just be up there with the Analog Pocket. And viability of PS1, like there are actual efforts in the community for Mister, which is like it's like an FPGA, but it's an all sort of access open source one. So it's like what Analog's doing, but in open source fashion. There's a whole bunch of effort to do this for PS1, and I think everyone in the community believes it's doable. And then maybe some people would ask, why is Analog not doing the Nintendo 64? I don't think the Nintendo 64 is going to be done like ever, or like in a very, very, very long time, because the actual chips on the Nintendo 64 are really, really like for their time super advanced and super complex with the way that they work.
Ultra 64.
Yeah, because you got the whole SGI stuff, and I just like, you even see it with emulators for 64 are still trash. Like PS1, there's really good emulators out there. Like you probably wouldn't even know if you're playing PS1 or like the emulator, whereas 64 you can tell straight away. Like I've never seen a 64 game emulated where I'm not like, oh, they're running this through an emulator and they're not actually playing it on the console. So I don't think they'll ever do the 64. I think, PS1 will be the next big one, and that would, I don't know what they'll do after that, to be perfectly frank, because I'm, people were debating whether they'd ever get around to TurboGrafx 16. They have. So there's kind of running out of consoles that they could even do this type of treatment with the FPGA. So it's exciting. I really think this is super cool. If I had crazy amount of money, I would buy it, but I just don't have the nostalgia for it, and it just doesn't make sense for me to get one. I don't have any games for these systems.
Yeah. I also noticed, so are they also doing like a converter or a card reader for the Pocket as well?
Yeah, so they'd already announced that. So that means, the Hucards with that Bomberman thing, you can actually play on that. So obviously it wouldn't be the CDs, but the card readers are really hard to...
The visual of like trying to jam a CD into the Pocket.
Well, I mean, look at the PSP. Essentially, that's like a little CD. Those UMDs, right?
That's true.
Which is still funny to think that they did that. Like, but that shows how advanced Sony is from a hardware engineering point of view. Like, they are so far ahead of everyone else in that realm. I like those adapters, but they didn't have all of them available at once, and because the shipping is so crazy to Australia, I'm just hoping for the off chance that they'll be more widely available, and then I can order them maybe in the future as a pack or something. I don't know, like, because they haven't finished them all yet, and Analog's had a bad history with those type of adapters. So just with the Mega SG, which is like the Mega Drive clone, Genesis clone for the States, the first ones they shipped out would actually brick the console. Shit. And they had to like immediately tell everyone, don't use them. Like, just throw them in the trash. We'll send you new ones for free. Right, so a little bit of an issue there, boys. And so just a bit of the background to that, they were actually using like a third party to make them, and then they were unhappy with the quality in the end, so they went in-house to make all of those things.
This is coming from a completely ignorant perspective. So these analog machines, is there any way to actually give them firmware updates or anything, or they're completely... Okay.
Yeah.
There is.
So all of them have, that I'm aware of, have like an SD card slot. So like either SD or I think micro SD for the Pocket potentially. So you just plug it in there and you can update the firmware. I had to do that with my Super NT to get the analog DAC to work, which allows me to plug it into my Sony Trinitron. And then also people use that to jailbreak the consoles, and then you can play like ROMs off the SD. But that's something that Analog themselves absolutely don't talk about, don't refer to, don't encourage at all. And yet it's kind of really strange. The hardware engineer, Kevtris, was the one who released the jailbreak. So it's
really strange. I don't know.
You know what? I have to say though, Analog, you know how I love business and legal stuff. It's because of my job as well, in my day job. But I read through their disclosures and things like that. I'm like, they got to be really careful. They got to be like maybe a bit more clearer, because I feel like they could actually have a cease and desist on their hands. They got to be more like clear around they have no association with like Nintendo, NEC, like any of these things. Like I read through it all. I'm like, this doesn't really clearly say to anyone, this has nothing to do with those companies helping them or being associated with them, because they're using their brands and their trademarks all the way through it. Like they're talking about TurboGrafx 16, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I was just, they obviously haven't been contacted by anyone, because just going through it, I'm like, like it's a bit strange the way that they're marketing it. Like, and it looks really, really cool and minimal and everything. So yeah, no, it's awesome. Looking forward to it. I really feel like, yeah, PlayStation 1 is likely next year. And that would be sick. Like I'd be all over it. And that's why I was just saying before, Final Fantasy 7, I actually think I'll wait until they have one of these FPGA clones of the PlayStation 1, and then I want to play it like that. Because I've been looking like heaps at getting a PlayStation 1, and it's just like they're so unreliable. The CD drives are failing. There's just a lot of issues, and I'm just like, oh, do I want to get original one, mod it, blah, blah, blah. And then I'm kind of thinking in the back of my mind, I feel like they're likely to do this because it's achievable, and it would sell, and it'd be a really cool piece of history to have a PlayStation like that in this format. So was there anything else you wanted to flag?
Nah, I'm all good. It's one of those topics where I wish I could, talk to it more, but I've always been keen to try more TurboGrafx games. I think it's gonna have to be the emulation world for me to experience some of that stuff, and maybe we'll hit some more games for the podcast like we did for Bonk.
Well, I wanted to convince myself to buy one of these, so I went on YouTube and looked at the top 50 like TurboGrafx 16 CD-Duo games of all time, and I'm like, sweet, I want to get some hidden gems I've never heard of and go, yeah, maybe I should get my hands on these, right? And then the number one on this it's just one person's list. The number one was like Street Fighter 2 Champions Edition, the 8-bit version, and I was just like, oh, okay. All right, this is not gonna. And then I think Bonks was 3. And I'm just like,
Bonks is a good game.
Yeah, but dude, like if that's the third best game on your console,
but this is someone's list.
Sure, but still, yeah, I don't know. I was just like, oh, yeah, maybe I need to look at. I think it's a good thing that you're saying. Like we should play one or two, maybe the ones that are underrated or something like that, or underappreciated, and then see how it goes. So going from my speculation about PS1. Why don't we get into some other headline news around a more recent version, more recent iteration of PlayStation?